Hey up. Back to the 70s jungle this episode with Last Cannibal World, also known by a few titles such as Jungle Holocaust, Carnivorous, Cannibals, The Last Survivor and Ultimo Mondo Cannibal. This is a 1977 Italian cannibal exploitation film directed by Ruggero Deodato, and it's directed before his breakout success with Cannibal Holocaust, which we covered in the Shameless collection if you wanted to check out my review on this film. The film stars Mimi Lay and Ivan Rassimov, who both appear in the film Deep River Savages. Now this is a film that obviously we're going to be covering later on in the Hard Gore collection, but funnily enough, Last Cannibal World is the spiritual sequel to Deep River Savages, and it's also a notoriously violent film being heavily cut by the BBFC and added to the Section 3 of the Video Nasties list in the 80s. So it's got a lot of history going for it. Let's see if it's any good, shall we?
Scared?
No, I'm not.
The plot follows a group of oil prospectors who are meeting up with a camp of people out in the jungle, but their plane encounters some issues and they have to make a crash landing. They find the camp eventually, but it turns out they've all been massacred by a tribe of cannibals who now have eyes on our group. They don't last too long, however, and there's only one left, a guy called Robert, who ends up being kidnapped by the tribe of cannibals. So now it's up to him to escape before he gets eaten. It's a pretty simple story, way more bare bones than a lot of these other cannibal films, but I think it really works. It really works. There was no midpoint dip for me, which can happen with a lot of these films. Instead, it kept its pace. It was intriguing and suspenseful, and it all culminates in this really satisfying final act. Now, I would definitely say that this is one of the best cannibal films I think I've ever seen. And it's definitely the best film we've covered so far in this collection.
3 times as much. The air conditioning alone must have cost him a fortune. Robert, you're eating bat meat, Robert. Understand?
First off, I am going to quickly preface this. There is a ton of nudity in this. The tribe, they're all naked constantly, and Robert has his knob out for about a third of the film, so clips are going to be sparse. I'm not going to be showing anything here, really, because the clips are few and far between. I want to save them for the actual clip sections in between each bit that I do. So, unfortunately, not too many clips, just because of the sheer amount of nudity in this. Now, on this note, obviously there is a sleaze element to this, but it's not as big as you'd probably imagine. A lot of the nudity is very National Geographic, you know, it's tribespeople naked, and that's just sort of it, really. Obviously there's a little bit more in there. There's some sexual violence sprinkled throughout, and the main cannibal girl, who's a bit of a love interest for Robert, has implants, which is kind of bizarre to say that she's a tribesperson, but you know, she's got her boobs out for a lot of it, and that seems a little more voyeuristic, but it's still a little tamer than you'd imagine. The gore's pretty great here as well. It's not shoved down your throat, but the stuff that we do get is effective. It's gooey and visceral, and yeah, all good stuff there, really good. The acting and dubbing is fine. As I said, this is a much more bare bones film. There's big chunks of this where there's not really any talking in it. A lot of it's just Robert on his own. But the dialogue that we do get it's fine. It's not too bad, to be honest. The acting's really good. The dialogue and dubbing, It's fine. Sometimes they do lean a little too heavily on like a bit of a silly over-the-top British accent, but outside of that it's manageable. And not all the characters are arseholes in this, which is nice. You can actually root for some of the people here. It's all very well made, looks nice, the camera work, it all just feels right, you know, we get some nice close-ups for suspense, some nice long shots of the jungle to feel isolated. Yeah, it all just worked really well, felt very competently made. Mix all this in with some pretty decent music in the soundtrack, and you get a pretty good film. And also there's some theremin music in there, can't go wrong with that.
The thing that worries me now is what do we do if those bloody savages have torn the plane apart? Just keep your fingers crossed.
As I mentioned earlier, this was pitched as a sequel to Deep River Savages, even including a lot of the same cast. Now, I haven't watched Deep River Savages yet, so I can't comment too far on this, but I have heard that even though the idea of it being a sequel was scrapped, it still retained a lot of similarities between the films. I'll have to comment more on this when we do talk about Deep River Savages though, because at this point I haven't seen it, so I don't really know. Animal cruelty. Something we always have to bring up with these Italian cannibal films. It's never nice, and it isn't nice here either, you know. Now, Deodato went on to say that no animals were harmed specifically for this film, it was all stock footage that they used in it. And this is a big lie, because there is clearly a scene with a snake getting its head bashed in that was made for this film, and there's a scene with an alligator that was used for this film. You can tell when it's stock footage in this. There is a lot of stock footage used, fair enough. But you can tell because the quality of the film is very different, it's much more washed out and brighter. You can just tell this sort of thing. Now this leads me in to another point about this film. So this is a cut version of the film that I watched. So firstly there's the alligator scene is completely missing for me. And you know what, fine, you can keep that. Don't want to see it, don't care. But there's also a scene of sexual violence that is removed. And you know, you can see why they'd remove something like that. But unfortunately, it leads into a big character change. So I was watching this and one of the characters suddenly goes from being one way to being another way. And there's the chunk that was missing, I didn't know it was missing. But it left me confused as to why there'd been this big flip-flop with one of the characters. So contextually it was kind of important. A bit of a shame that it's missing, I guess. So this film is 92 minutes uncut apparently, and the version I watched was 85 minutes. Okay, time for the print, and unfortunately it does have some issues. It's not the worst that we've seen, it's watchable, but there are a few problems here. The screen flickers every now and then, there's a few pops and stuff as well. Also, it's either overexposed in some brighter shots or very underexposed in some darker shots. Yeah, it's not awful, but it's not great picture-wise. The audio is probably worse than this as well because it's quite compressed. You can really tell with the music, it sort of crumples all the sounds up and it just doesn't sound good at all, to be honest. There's also a persistent tone, high-pitched tone in the background for about 20 minutes, at least I noticed it for about 20 minutes. And maybe I just got used to it, but for that 20 minutes it was pretty annoying. Also, it was shot in 2.35:1 aspect ratio, so that's like super widescreen. And then this is converted into a 4:3, so you've got bars. And then this is shown on a 16:9 TV, so it just looks tiny in the middle of the screen. So yeah, even though it is watchable, it's not great. And on the disc, we get the usual stuff, chapter select, trailer for this film and a Hard Gore trailer reel. But we get a few extra bits as well. We get an image gallery, which is quite interesting because it's got some of the older covers for the film, like VHS and stuff like that. We get a filmography and a biography for Deodato. We get, production notes? Yeah, we get production notes, which are actually production notes this time. And we get a reviews section, which is a pretty long-winded write-up on the film, but it ends with some book recommendations. So yeah, again, it's not interesting, the stuff that we do get here, but at least we get a bit extra this time. Okay, let's have a look at this case then. And another pixelated cover, kind of like Zombie Chronicles was. It's a shame again because this skull does look pretty decent. We get a strange review on the front too. Dynamite. This is another one with the bigger Hard Gore logo on the front, and I like to bring these up because there aren't too many of these, and it always looks weird. It's almost like a bootleg of a knock-offy looking series. It's weird. The info on the back all seems alright really, no big complaints, reads fine, runtime's correct too, which is nice. Lastly, this is one of those with the Goosebumps style catalogue inside. Overall then, this was a pleasant surprise. There's a lot to like about this film. I liked the plot, the setting, the camera work, it kept its pace, it's got great gore, it was suspenseful. Yeah, a pretty decent package of a film, to be honest. I think what I've learned from this, and from Cannibal Holocaust, is that I really like Deodato cannibal films. I've heard that there's one more in an unofficial trilogy, so I might have to check that one out, you know, because so far, these two have probably been my favourite cannibal films. So yeah, I definitely recommend this film, 100%, well worth checking out if you can find a copy. That leads us into the next part. Finding this film in the UK is a bit tricky. So you've got this, and you've got an overpriced Shriek Collection DVD. And that's pretty much your lot, unfortunately. There's been no big Blu-ray re-release of this in the UK. Now, there are some imports. I can't speak for the quality or the cuts on these, but there are a few imports knocking about. There's none from any big label that I recognise though, which is odd, really. I mean, 88 films, shameless. What are you doing? Get this released. Pull your finger out. Weird, isn't it? So, yeah. Pretty good this episode. Well, one of the best, you might say. The best so far, you might say. And I don't think that that's going to be the case next episode. We're leaving the jungles behind for an episode before we dip back in. And we're going into... It's not really Millennium trash, it's just before it, but it definitely looks like trash. Who knows what we're going to get in this next one, because we're going to be looking at Dawn They Sleep.